Howdy folks, this is Frank the Drifter here once again for the third installment of Dollar Country Interviews. This time around we've got my buddy Clint Holley on the horn. Clint is the owner-operator of Well Made Music, a vinyl mastering and cutting facility in Cleveland, Ohio, as well as the Earnest Tube, which is a direct-to-lacquer recording studio in Bristol, Virginia. Bristol is known as the birthplace of country music. Clint and I talk about what the country scene was like in Cleveland back when, cutting lacquers, and country music. I hope you enjoy. And as always, if you'd like to donate to the show, you can do so at patreon.com/dollarcountry. Every little bit helps. If you'd like to help the show in a non-monetary way, then please like, subscribe, leave a review online, and share it on your social medias to get the word out. You can follow Dollar Country at Dollar Country, all one word, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And so, without further ado, here's my interview with Clint Holley. Well, you want to talk about Cleveland country stuff?
Sure.
Yeah, I kind of like have had this idea of interviewing people for Dollar Country for a while, but just never really had the time or didn't get around to it. But seeing as I have so much time now, I kind of been getting a hold of different people. Just the idea is just like people in the greater country world, or people I deal with, or people who collect or like country, and just kind of talking to them about stuff they're interested in country-wise.
Right.
And then especially also about like stuff they might know more about than someone else. So like with you, I know that you know a lot about the country music in the world of Cleveland.
I don't know much about really the commercial recorded part of it, but yeah, man, I spent some time back in the 90s like tearing it up around here in these places. So, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. What was it like? Like, what was the feel? Were there a lot of country shows?
Well, how I got into it actually was one time me and a buddy of mine had a garage sale, and I was the guy kind of minding the garage sale at the time, and this older gentleman, he walked up the driveway, and he was, poking around, and he had this cool belt buckle on that said Nashville on it, and I just said something casually to him about country music or whatever, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm a pedal steel player, like, are you into country?" I said, "Oh yeah, I'm a songwriter and I play." And he's like, "Well, we should get together and jam." And like, so his name was Chuck Raleigh was his name. And he played pedal steel, and he gave me his number. And like, he lived on the near west side, like around West 96th Street. And we started to get together and jam. His wife worked like second shift at one of the hospitals. So like, we could like play till like, 10, 11 o'clock and not bother her. And then she would come in and like tell him to like go to bed or whatever. Like, she was like the mean wife. But so his deal was, though, he played in like these country bands. It used to be these bars, like the bars were located like mostly like Clark, Denison, Storer Avenue, like this whole kind of near west side part of Cleveland. And a lot of them, what they would do is the band would come in on like Wednesday night and set up, and then they played every night till like Saturday. So they played like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So they were like the house band. And so he started like inviting me out to these places, and like, it was like a whole different world, man. It was crazy. Like, there was this, this whole group of people that had come up to Cleveland to get jobs in the steel mills and stuff like that. So like, there was these real heavily, like, we kind of called it like Little Kentucky, like it was like these real like kind of Appalachian neighborhoods, and they just still loved like all this classic country. And so there was one that's like on Storer Avenue that was it was a bowling alley at one point. This place was giant, and his band played in there, and they played in these little places. There was one called, I think, like Kathy's Country Corners, and every week they would just play it like a different bar. There's one that's still around. It's called Fat Boys now. It's by Lorraine and 140th. That was called the Country Club, and like their week started off on Wednesday nights, and then Tina's. I don't know if you've ever been to Tina's for like karaoke, like down Tina's there. No. So Tina's used to have country bands all the time, and before they switched over to karaoke, and so Tina's plays into all this because the other guy that I met was my blind drummer friend named Bill Martin, who when I started DJing on WCSB in the mid 90s. I was playing the song "The Eyes of Texas" by Milton Brown and the Musical Brownies, and like my phone rang and I picked it up. This guy starts telling me about how he's from down south in Texas, and he misses that kind of music. And I was saying, oh yeah, I got this country band. You should come check us out. And we were playing at Tina's that night. And so he's like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll come check it out. And I was like, you hang up the phone and, people tell you all kinds of things. So I was like, I never thought I'd hear from the guy again. So I get to the gig that night to set up like around 8 or 9 o'clock. And like the barmaid comes over to me and she says, are you Clint? And I said, yeah, I'm Clint. She's like, there's this guy that's been waiting at the bar here since like 11 o'clock this afternoon. And I'm like, what? And so she points him out and I go down and talk to him and I figure out right away, obviously, that he's like sight impaired and he doesn't drink. So he's just been sitting there like talking to her like all day long. He's probably driving her nuts. And so Bill was the most amazing encyclopedia of country music I ever have ran into. Like, because of his lack of sight, his memory was like a vice. It was crazy. Like, he could tell you, like, if you heard a song on the radio, he could tell you like who it was, who wrote it, who played on it, the date that it was released, the first time he heard it on the radio, and like the first radio station he ever heard it on. And the crazy thing is I used to be like, oh yeah, whatever. Bill just says whatever. And I had a Fats Domino box set and we were listening to it one night at my house, and it listed the release dates of like every record. And like, so one song came on and he was like, oh, I remember hearing that in like, June of like 1956. And I like opened the book and it like came out in like May of 1956. And I'm like, damn, dude, like that's pretty crazy. So that was when I was really getting heavily into going to flea markets and stuff. So like, he was the guy that like, I would pick him up. We would make all the bars. Like, he was a drummer. So the country club at 140th and Lorraine, their week started every week on Wednesday nights, and they would have like this open musician jam night where they had a house band, but then other people would come in and sit in and play. So Bill would go up there and they would let him play drums, and he sang also. And so his big one that he loved to play was I Can't Stop Loving You. And he would play drums on it and sing at the same time. And it was pretty fucking amazing. I mean, it was like, and so it was cool running around with him because like, you could go into some pretty sketchy places and like, nobody's really going to fuck with a blind guy and his like handler. Like, I mean, it's like, we almost had like this insurance policy, and Bill could hear, his hearing was amazing. Like, he could hear what people were saying like across the bar, just because all of his other senses were like just heightened to this point that like, and somebody would give him their phone number and he would remember it. And obviously he wouldn't write anything down. And it was, the saddest part is when he passed away, he never wrote my phone number down, and his wife was blind also. So she had no way to contact me. They had moved to Oklahoma at that time, and he passed away, and I never heard from anybody until I called like a year later trying to find him. And she was like, oh, well, I couldn't get a hold of you because he never wrote your phone number down anywhere. And, so, crazy stuff like that. But yeah, man, we used to go all over. I mean, Broadview Road had a lot of bars. There was this place called the Last Chance Saloon that was on Broadview. They used to have bands, and that was like back in the, kind of the line dancing days. But then these other places, like where I'd go with Chuck, like, I mean, they were heavy on like the classic stuff, like Merle Haggard, George Jones, Johnny Paycheck, like all that stuff. And that stuff lasted up until like the very late 90s. When I started my own band, I went back to a lot of those places to try and book us, and they turned us down because by then they all started doing karaoke and it was cheaper. And then the big thing they said that they had less fights during karaoke. So like, so they stopped booking live for years. So that's kind of what like Cleveland country was like back in the 90s, man. It was a lot of fun. I mean, a lot of other people that I know, when I started working at the Beachland in 2000, a lot of people I wasn't that much of a rock and roller. So like they went to a lot of these other clubs, and I was hanging out in these weird, like seedy, like there was a place on Denison called the Bluegrass Inn that had a band that was their house band on the weekends called East Ohio Grass. which is a takeoff. I know you're not from here, but the gas company here used to be called East Ohio Gas. So like they called their band East Ohio Grass. And they used to set up in this place. It was like around 18th and Denison. And every Friday and Saturday night, man, bluegrass, like straight up, traditional style bluegrass. That was pretty cool. Their lead singer, one of the guys in the band, I can't remember if it was the singer or not, committed suicide. And so that brought all that to an end. But the Bluegrass Inn was there up until about, maybe like 10 years ago, it was still there. They didn't really do live music anymore either. And that was in the same neighborhood as the Ugly Broad. I don't know if you've ever been to that place over on Denison either.
No.
But that's still there, and worth checking out. I know you like quintessentially Cleveland places, and the Ugly Broad definitely is one of those places. The whole like Storr, Denison, Clark area, that was all country back in the day. And in the last 20 years, you've seen that area now that's more of like a Latino neighborhood. And a lot of those bars are like Latin bars now. The one that I was telling you about that was a bowling alley way back in the day is like a Latin. It's called El Tropical or something like that now, and total Latin bar. So it's just interesting to see how the neighborhood has like changed over the last 20 to 25 years too.
Yeah, it is interesting. So all those neighborhoods are kind of like they'd be kind of in Clark Fulton now, considered to be Clark Fulton area?
Yeah, because you have. You got Denison and then Storer Avenue and then Clark. They all run parallel to each other with all of their, parallel or perpendicular side streets, which would be like, West 40th, West 44th Street.
Right.
All the numbered streets would run north-south, and then Storer, Denison, and Clark all run kind of east-west generally.
That's interesting. So the time when you were running around doing all that stuff was kind of like mid to late 90s mostly?
Yeah, that would have been probably from 1990, 94 through like 96, 97. I'm trying to remember when I met Chuck Raleigh. That might have been actually even earlier. That might have been like, early 90s, say 92 to 97 probably. That 5-year period was when I was doing a lot of that.
So how old were the people playing? Was it a lot of older guys still playing music, or was it younger people too?
It was a combination, but like in the traditional places, it was older guys. Like that guy Chuck that I told you about, he was probably, when I met him, he was probably in his late 60s, early 70s. And Bill Martin, the blind drummer, he was in his 50s when I met him. And, he grew up in the same town as, he spent some time in the same town as Johnny Paycheck. And he told me this story, which I have never verified. He played drums for a few gigs with Johnny Paycheck. And so back in the late 90s, Johnny Paycheck came through town and he played at this place out in North Ridgeville that was just like it was the Boot Scootin' Saloon kind of place, and I actually got Johnny Paycheck's autograph at the end of the night, and Johnny was like sitting there on the driver's seat of his tour bus, and you could like step on the steps and like get the autograph. So I'm like, dude, I got to ask you a question. And like, I said, did you ever have a blind drummer? And like, he looked at me and he was like, son, I've had a lot of drummers. And I was like, okay, fair enough. So I just let it rest at that. So I never verified if Bill did play for Johnny Paycheck or not, but he said he did. So it was, and he could play. I mean, he wasn't just a hack. I mean, he was like, fairly, accomplished at it too. And it was very interesting to watch him play too. Cause I mean, he would sit down behind the kit, and even if it was an unfamiliar kit, he would just like casually like reach around, feel where like the edge of every drum and every cymbal was at, and then like, boom, they would go. And I'm trying to remember the name of the band that used to have the open jam at the country club up on 140th in Lorraine. But I remember the lead singer's name was Gail, Gail, and like they knew Bill, and like every time he came in, they set him up and let him sit in and play.
Cool, man. So you grew up liking country? You grew up listening to country? Were your parents in the country?
I got into country when I was like about 12 years old.